Good evening, everyone. I'm Dirk Solomons, Director of the Humanitarian Affairs Program here at SIPA, and we are here to contemplate the two Sudans, for better or for worse. For better and for worse has connotations of marriage. I'm not sure if we're talking about a happy union, a recent divorce. So the simile of marriage may work both ways, but we are looking at a situation in the two Sudans where tensions have actually increased since the separation took place. And we've seen that at the military level, there are troops still not withdrawn. There are military assaults, and a lot of what should have been arranged on the basis of the General Peace Agreement still has not been implemented. And worse than that, over 2 million people are still lingering in camps in Darfur, unresolved. Decade of violence and neglect by now, and no clear peaceful resolution is in sight. Meanwhile, on the borders, things have changed in Libya, things have changed in Egypt, and you wonder how the shifts in power there affect the impact these countries have had and will have on what's happening in Sudan proper and in the south. Gulf states have major investments, Chinese have major investments. What are they doing? What are they thinking? And in these complex dynamics of violence and commercial interests and people clinging onto power and people fighting for power, what are the dynamics? Will conflict trump peace building? Will this marriage hold? How about those UN missions, UNAMID, UNMISS, UNIFSA? Are they going to play a positive role or are they marginal? Climate change, demographic pressures, are they influential or are they things we should shove aside until things have become clear in the longer term? Now, this conference brings together a number of people who have been there, done that, who are truly experts from experience and from analysis, and I will introduce them as we get the panels going. But we're having one panel now for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Then at 7:30 we'll have a 15-minute break where you have a quick refreshment in the lobby. Then we'll have another panel until about 9 o'clock. And at the end of it, we can continue with cheese and wine informally in the lobby. Panelists will speak each for about 20 minutes, and then we have a microphone lined up, and we'll have some time for Q&A before the panels are brought to an end. Now, usually one says words of thanks at the end of a conference, but people lose attention at the end. And that's why I think it's important now to say that Kathleen Kanungagin and Ashley Skiles, who are here or who are maybe minding the store outside, have made this all possible. They have been the departmental research assistants in our area, and without their incredible efforts, this would not have happened. So a word of thanks to them and a welcome to our panel. The first panel, in order of appearance, are Luca Byung-Deng, who is a former Minister of Cabinet Affairs for the National Government of Sudan, who at the time represented South Sudan and who is now Executive Director of Kush Incorporated. And next to him, Tanya Domi, who is Chair of the Board of Our Humanity in Balance and also a beloved adjunct here at SIPA. And next to her, Huda Shafak Ali, who is a human rights advocate. We're very lucky to have her as our guest at Columbia for a few months, and she's leaving soon, and who is Vice President of the Gesser Center for Development Khartoum. We prepared short bios of each of them in the program, so I won't have to bore you with long recitals. And even these short bios are only extracts of very impressive and long CVs of people who've done amazing things. So, Luca, you have the floor with an introduction about the political background.
First, I would like to register my profound appreciation for the university and the school for bringing attention to the world and to you about about the unfolding and alarming situation in Sudan. So I really sincerely thank you, Dad, for bringing such a focus, and I'm so grateful. And I like also to appreciate the way you put the themes of the conference, and that is actually capturing the challenges and the difficulties facing Sudan. The way I would like to start is really to look at at Sudan and the efforts being done in shaping it and pushing it towards a better Sudan, and in particular to focus on CPA as the basis upon which Sudan has been reframed with the hope that it should become a better Sudan. But then importantly, even after when we're going for the referendum, we engage of how best we can learn from other experience of other countries, because usually divorce is not an easy thing. And that's why we engage ourselves of what we could do to maintain the achievement of the CPA, even if the Sudan is going to break up. So I want to paint those two elements about how we would like, as Sudanese, to create two Sudans that are better than the old Sudan. But then I will try to focus on the current situation, the post-secession Sudan, and the clear forces of producing two Sudans for worse. But then highlighting the new state of Southern Sudan and the challenges facing it in terms of building the new state, as well as trying to reproduce a very hopeful picture of part of the Sudan. And then conclusions of what are the things to be done to avoid this alarming situation in Sudan. Being part of the struggle in the South, but equally important also negotiating peace, but also participating in implementing the peace, being in the government of the South and government of national government and minister in the national government. I'm one of the people that was so hopeful. I think if there is an achievement in Africa, in the continent, is the comprehensive peace agreement. And this agreement managed really to lay a very good foundation and a hopeful picture for the Sudan. We're having a very autocratic regime that was becoming disturbing to the continent, but even to the region, with a very extreme radical Islam that was spreading to the rest of the continent. And the South and the SPLM was quite vigilant to contain this expansion of the Arab Islamic agenda to the continent. And it was so difficult at two ideologies incompatible, fighting each other to define the reality in Sudan. One of the people who believe Sudan a great nation that managed to stand up and to bring, and I think if you look at the civilization of Sudan, it's unbelievable. From Christianity to Kushite and Meroic history, these are the people who have really built a civilization that you should be very proud of, being diluted now by these political Islamists. And that's why the struggle in the South was a struggle of identity, a struggle for a better Sudan. But it became difficult because fighting itself is not enough to actually gain what you want. And that's why peace agreement was a middle way. And that's why in 2002 we signed a Machakos agreement that when we failed to agree of this building a secular Sudan, we agreed to have an Islamic government in Khartoum, but equally also with a lot of changes that I would like to highlight, but also having a secular state in the South. Then with the hope that we should be, is a step towards changing the affairs in the Sudan. But one of the biggest achievements of that agreement, the issue of diversity. For the first time in the history of Sudan, that the diversity is going to be seen as a virtue rather than a curse. This is a country being projected from one angle, two paradigms of Islam and Arabism. But this agreement managed to define the state for the first time on this pluralism and diversity as a virtue. And we managed to define this one in the nature of the state. That is a state that is defined of being multicultural, multi-religious, multilingual. And this should be the source of the state, redefining the state for the first time. But even if also we agree that Islamic Sharia will be the source of legislation in the north, we say we should also, the legislation should rely on the customs and values of the choice of the people. So it's not absolute. And even each state has the right, actually, to review those legislation, national legislation, if they are not fitting to the will of the people. But importantly, the status of religion. Although we agree that the religion or Sharia will be the source of legislation and the religion in the north, but we say there is a freedom of other religions and they should be respected on those ones. But one of the very important aspects of this is of the CPA is the indigenous languages, because we have so many ethnic groups in Sudan. It is only one language being promoted, that is the Arabic language. But for the first time, we agreed that all Sudanese languages, indigenous languages, are national languages, and they be promoted, protected, and respected. Also the citizenship, we say that the citizenship is not to be based on religion, but it will be based, the basic of any of duties and responsibility will be based on citizenship, not based on the religion. And this is one of the very important achievements of reforming Sudan for a better. The other aspect is the devolution of powers and that the authority will be vested in the will of the people, and that we've said the best way to contain conflict is a devolution of power from the center to the lower level, where the people can have more chances to participate in the decision making. And one of the biggest achievements also the right of self-determination for the people of South Sudan. You know, most of the African countries, these state or these nations have been created through the colonial decision with no any choice of the people, the free will of the people. And particularly in Southern Sudan, this is a part of Sudan that was consistently being identified itself with East Africa. And just recklessly, when the colonial power was leaving, they put the two Sudan together. And the people of South were never asked. And it was shifting of colonial power from UK, I mean from Britain to the north. And this is the feeling of the South. And that was so important, that having the people of Southern Sudan to have a choice for the first time was so important. And that's why it's the biggest achievement also to contain the issue of war and conflict in Sudan, because Sudan has been consistent in the war, especially the South. And then the issue of self-rule and popular consultation for people of Nuba Mountain and Southern Blue Nile. And this one is a very important, because these people, they were looking for a right of self-determination. We failed to get it, but we said, let us have popular consultation, so the elected parliaments will assess to what level the CPA has made the aspiration of the people of Nuba Mountain. But they were so determined to get the right of self-determination. A very thorny issue, and we managed in this agreement to let these people to have a choice in a referendum whether they would like to be part of the North or the South. These are very important achievements of the CPA. And these are the things that we felt should forge Sudan to become a better Sudan. And I think it's very important when we're looking at this, at the future of Sudan. Now, for us, when we were very clear that now Southern Sudan is going to secede, we went into a very rigorous legislation process. And with this act, Southern Sudan Referendum Act 2009, we put a clause there as an Article 67 that focused on post-referendum arrangements. And we focused on key issues of nationality, issues of currency, issue of public service, issues of security, issues of assets and debts, and issues of oil. The whole oil is becoming a very important. And then there are a whole lot of property and issue of ownership. And we're so particular about these issues because we learned from other experience, either from Eritrea and Ethiopia, or from East Timor, Indonesia, or even Pakistan and India. And we said we should be able actually to avert what happened after the secession or the divorce of the two countries. Or usually we see these issues are creating problems. So ahead of time, we started discussing these issues, and even we made legislation. And based on that one, we have as two parties, entrusted and mandated the African Union high-level implementation panel headed by President Mbeki of South Africa, Abu Bakr of Nigeria, and also the President Buyoya of Burundi. And this is the way we committed ourselves, even after secession, to have a better Sudan and to maintain what we have achieved in the CPA. Now, I think when we talk about two Sudan, even after secession, that's thing that we need to know about the North-South relationship. For me, these are inevitable relationships. These are relationships nobody will temper, actually, to downplay them. These are relationships, the politicians, they don't have any option except to flourish and nurture these relationships. Because these are relationships being there for centuries and for years. One of the most important aspects, so when we talk about the two Sudan, even after secession, what are the ties and the bonds between these two nations? With the secession of the South, now we have the longest border in Africa. I think about 50% of the border of Southern Sudan is with the North. So this is a border that you cannot control with anything except with good relationship. And social capital. Over years, I think you know also the impact of social capital in terms of governance, in terms of development. I mean, we have a very strong relationship between the North and the South, even at the family, at the community level. So either through education, or through employment, or through the trading. So you have these huge, and even I could say, on average, a household in Southern Sudan should know at least one or two people in the North. So it's a huge resource that you cannot do without it. And we have a common history. I mean, I talked earlier about a common history and civilization, because this is a country, when you talk about Kushite, civilization is one of the richest African civilizations, and even Meroic civilization. And these are African civilizations that there's no way you cannot leave alone the legacy of the current political powers in Sudan. Arabic language is also very important. Even if you look at the South, almost on average, about 60% of the people that talk Arabic. It's a trading language in the South today, although English now is the official language. Natural resources, with the secession of the South constitute about 45% of the Nile Basin. So what is happening, you have taken the whole of the Nile Basin. 98% of the South is in Nile Basin. The vegetation of Sudan, almost about 80% of the vegetation after the secession is being taken by the South. And you have these transboundary populations that are depending so much on the South. So these are key issues that are actually tying together the North and the South. So whenever you talk about two Sudan, you should talk about two Sudan in this context of the interdependence between the North and the South. But what are we seeing afterwards with all these things? What are we seeing? But even before that one, we committed ourselves as two parties under the auspices and facilitation of African Union for a joint future vision of two Sudan. And we committed ourselves that we should focus, the two states should focus on promoting viable two states, with a key element that we have agreed upon as the two parts before the, and we started discussing about the issue of relationship. This relationship not only to be peaceful and constructive, but this relationship should be quite strong within the two states, but even with the neighbors. Equally important, we talk about these states, they must be stable and democratic, and also they should be guided by these policies and institutions that are, and also to be inspired by what we have achieved in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. Even we made some commitments, very clear commitment, as two states, a need for a secure and peaceful two Sudans, and also economic viability of the two states, with an attempt, even in the long run, to have an economic integration between the two states, and political stability and viability of two states. These are key things that we have agreed upon under the auspices of the African Union. Now, what happened afterwards? Post-secession Sudan, I'm talking about the continuing state, the Sudan. A clear case of abandoning those commitments within the CPA or what we agreed initially through African Union. Soft border. Immediately, President Bashir, President himself, closing the border after the session, and saying closing the border in order to increase suffering for the people of Sudan, Southern Sudan. And indeed, this is what happened. I moved along the north-south border, and that created real agony and suffering by a decision of one person, President Bashir. Citizenship. And I say the basic of rights and duties of Sudan enshrined in the Constitution is based on citizenship, not based on religion. It's one of the biggest achievements of the CPA. After the secession of the South, President Bashir announced that now Sudan is purified, it's becoming pure Arabs, pure Muslims. And they said now with the secession of the South, that's it. Forgetting that in Sudan we still have non-Muslims and non-Arabs. Huge number. You take Darfur, Nuba Mountain, Southern Blue Nile, even far north, these are non-Arabs. And they form a real majority. So this is a short-sightedness of the leadership in the north. All infrastructure, we're discussing about how even they themselves to have pipelines. But then the South to have access, use those pipelines, using international practices of the fees in terms of the transit fees and what happened, President Bashir announced that is going to close the pipeline. But even recently, and they levy about $32.2 per barrel coming from the south to be exported through the north. It's the same distance, about 1,500 kilometers. Chad and Cameroon, they have their oil that they are exported through Cameroon, the same distance, 1,500. How much are they paying? $0.42. And here you have a government asking about $32.2 per barrel to pass through the north. Using it, actually what is happening now is extortion, robbery, by the fact that the South, they don't have another pipeline, they're using the north. And they're just sitting at the port, taking whatever they want to take. Currency redemption. One of the things that we agreed, the South was supposed to have its own currency. Usually, as you know, the currency is a liability of the central government. And when we agreed that the currency that is going to be redeemed by the South by having its own currency, that currency is going to be used by the central bank of the South in order to promote trading between the North and the South. Before the independence, they issued their own new currency. It's another way so that they don't take the responsibility of the redeemed currency. Actually, the South is now having about not less than $450 million as the value of the redeemed Sudanese pounds. It really is a real crime. Civil service, we agreed that one of the things that we want to do, at least an option to choose, especially on the issue of citizenship. And we said we should retain some basic freedoms. Freedom of the Sudanese people, freedom to work, freedom to move, freedom to own, and freedom to reside. These are the same freedom that they agreed with, even with Egypt. What happened after the independence? The Sudan government, the NCP, decided to dismiss all the Southern Sudanese working in the public institutions, but even denying them that even pension and post-service benefits is amounting about $1.3 billion US. And they decide not to pay that one. Invasion of Abyei, a clear case that we, the two parties, we agreed that the African Union will look for an option and Bashir himself and his defense minister invaded Abyei in a barbaric way that resulted in displacement of 110,000 people displaced, and every day now children are dying and elderly people are dying because of that action of one person. Conflict in Darfur, in Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile. I think you are aware about the human tragedy that is unfolding in these states. These are the states, part of the North. They want nothing except just only to have a popular consultation and their own self-rule. And we agreed that we should look for a way of how best we can use the soldiers that participated with the South. But then you have this regime that decided to go for the war option. I think we're talking now, not less than 500,000 or 1 million people being displaced, but even that pursuing them, even in the South, bombarding them, and creating real human suffering of a large scale. Clear case of ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. that are committed by this regime in these two states and even in Abyei. Political Islam and radicalism. Maybe I have a very extended version of this one, and this is the area, this is why I would like to highlight why the Sudan government is so arrogant. What we are seeing in the Arab Spring, especially what is happening in North Africa, especially in Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia, I think it is very important for us to focus. What is happening is that political Islam is hijacking the popular uprising of the people in these states. But let me give you the linkages, which is very important, based on my own information, is that what is happening is that, see what is happening in Egypt. We know the Egyptians, the Muslim Brotherhood, they have a very long history with the National Congress Party in terms of the ideology. But even before the elections, I know how the NCP invested heavily. But I know even the NCP leaders managed to invest heavily in order to see the shape of the election. What are we seeing today? You have the Muslim Brotherhood coming with majority with extremists, Islamists, and then they form a majority. The liberals who are actually championing the Tahrir uprising being marginalized. And what is going to happen, we are going to see Omar Suleiman, Amr Musa is going to be the president, and they're going to dominate the affairs in Egypt. What is even the leadership of Arab League, I think, is going to be now in the hands of the political Islamists. It's a big change for them. These are going to stand very powerful with the NCP to consolidate the agenda of Islam in Sudan, but not only in Sudan, even in the continent. Libya, a clear case of how this government and President Bashir talked publicly, how he mobilized all his forces in order to change the Gaddafi. What is going to happen, I think 2 days ago, they had a very important meeting in Khartoum. And actually, the leadership of Libya telling Bashir that, look, for the sake of Islam, we are going to avail whatever we are going to lose from the secession of the South, we are going to cover that one. But not only that, we are going to even consolidate even more resources so that the Islam is protected in Sudan. It is a clear case that what is going to happen, that you are going to have a regime with more resources that is going to consolidate Islamic agenda, and that is going to destabilize the whole of the region. Clear case of Chad. It's very clear that the Chad, because the Libyan leadership, they believe that the Chad, they have assisted Gaddafi, and they will be willing now in order to remove the regime in Chad. Even the same thing in Eritrea. And for them, for the South, it's a big threat to them. It's a threat in terms of this is a barrier for the spread of the Islamic agenda in the continent. So you see, really, the arrogance is not coming from nowhere, because this regime is getting resources in terms of how they will consolidate. You might have seen the Iranian president going to Sudan, but even Hamas and the rest of the extremists are now having a series of meetings of consolidating Islamic agenda. A real threat to the continent and to the region. Leave alone the deterioration of the North-South relationship. I know I have a bit of a problem of time now. The challenges, when we talk, but we still the hopeful picture of this other part of Sudan, about the new state of Southern Sudan. I think it's a new country having a challenges of state building. It has its own internal challenges for any state building, but I think it is very important the political stability would depend on how SPLM could create a space and other voices. For me, and one of the people I believe, for stability in the South, it is critical while we are focused on the development of other political parties. I think the issue of civil society and the media and have effective check and balance are very important in the South. Economic viability of the South, the whole issue of the resource curse, and how best the South could avoid the periods of these resource curse, and consolidating the unity and social cohesion. Equally important is the issue of priority setting between the issues of governance vis-a-vis peace and stability. I know even this engagement, people may be having a lot of demand now about issue of accountability, but I think it's very important that we should focus more on the how the South could consolidate the issues of peace and stability first, and then issue of governance. I think managing the issue of relation with the North is a very big challenge to this government. But I think positioning itself, even in the region, is very important, because if you see dealing with the neighbors, these are very difficult neighbors, and And the South needs to position itself in such a way not to ignite what is happening, but to become a source of unity and peace building within the. If you take IGAD, for example, there are a lot of problems. If the South is going to be a member, you should look carefully how best it could help this regional grouping, or East Africa. You might have heard that Sudan have been rejected, but I think even for the South to get to East Africa economic grouping, it's very important that they should assess it carefully. I think the most hopeful thing is about the Horn of Africa, where I think having a focus on economic integration in the Horn of Africa will bring on board most of these countries. I think positioning itself in the global arena is very important. The whole lot of West and East, especially China, India, is very important, especially if you look at the issue of oil development. And I think the sanctions that are facing Sudan now, if we're not careful, that the Asians' investment is going to monopolize. And I think there's a need of opening and creating opportunity for competition in these areas. So I have a lot of issues about this issue of the Northeast. But even Israel and Arab world, the South is very clear. It has a very clear commitment to the people of Israel in terms of the people who are suffering. They associate themselves with them. But equally important also, you should be mindful that the Arab world is so important for them in terms of associating themselves with. So they need to balance all those ones. Sort of for conclusion, I will go there up. I think two Sudans are in danger unless there are some actions taken. For the new state of Southern Sudan, I think this is a state that we need to, is a hopeful state that we, the international community, we should exert more efforts to ensure that this state is successful. I think investing in Southern Sudan, it is investing in stability and security in this country. I think also we need to balance also with the demand on this new state. It is critical at this stage, the issue of peace and stability and security is very important. While the demand for governance is very important, but I think we need to balance and then to prioritize and then to see. So I could see this is a hopeful part of the Sudan that we need to invest in it in order to be a successful state. The Islamic political Sudan, I think this is a real threat, not to the region, but to the world. I think it is very important that a more support for democratic forces in Sudan is critical. And I think definitely the humanitarian crisis is very alarming, and we cannot continue watching what is happening. It's important for the international community also to work towards a no-fly zone to save those people who are now suffering in caves and in this part of Southern Sudan. I think it is very important that the human rights investigation to be strengthened and then to be called upon. There are some countries in the Security Council rejecting the thorough investigation of human rights in Sudan. What is happening in these three areas is exactly what happened in Darfur, and they're repeating themselves in a clear case in these three areas. And I think the indictment of the current Minister of Defense is a good sign. But I think there's a need of full implementation of unfinished business of the CPA. For the international community, I think there's a need of more diplomatic pressure and sanction on Sudan. I am one of the people, as I painted the picture of what is happening in Sudan, is alarming. But even it is very important for the international community to reconsider restraining the diplomatic relation with Sudan, because it is really very naive and uncalled for, morally uncalled for you to maintain a relationship with this country. And you are these things are going to unfold tomorrow. And for you to maintain a relationship, diplomatic relations that are not resulting in anything, but resulting in suffering, human suffering, I think it is very important the countries to reconsider the diplomatic relation with the Sudan. And close monitoring of transparent use of oil revenue in Libya. But for me, I'm very concerned. The way that Libya is going to come up is going to use those resources in order to invest heavily in political Islam, not only in Sudan, but all over. It's a danger. And I think it's very important to keep an eye of how these resources are going to be used. Otherwise, they will end up in Sudan, and Sudan is going to use them effectively to spread this Islamic agenda to the rest of the continent. Lastly, but I think it is very important for all of us, the international community, to stand together for the indicted Sudanese individuals to be brought to the justice. And I think that is the thing that will help in order to see justice in Sudan. I know I want to share a lot of things, and we as Kush Inc. were working in order to help in building the two states, a viable two states between the North and the South, but even having a very successful Southern Sudan. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca, for this very thoughtful and very passionate presentation. Tanya, you've actually been working in South Sudan, and we'd love to hear your views on, having worked there, your views on particularly South Sudanese capacity and governance from advisors' perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. And it's really wonderful to meet Luca tonight, because when I first went to Juba in August of 2010, I was supposed to meet with him and hand off a letter to Luca, and he had been moved to Khartoum. And so I passed it off to a third party who assured me he would get the letter. And tonight I found out, indeed, he received the letter. So we all travel in familiar places along parallel paths. I would just preface my remarks by saying, yes, I am an adjunct at SIPA, and I teach human rights, principally on the Eurasia, East Central Europe, former Yugoslavia space. I have worked in 12 countries. I have worked in Western Africa. But I got engaged on Sudan because of a former colleague of mine who I joined in Juba and worked as an advisor to the president of the government of South Sudan. I went over there in a capacity to help the government bolster its efforts on public education, strategic communications, working on messaging, media training, and I trained everybody, including President Kiir. During that time, I also got to meet with a number of women ministers, which was really quite an experience for me. And they, too, had ties back here, having done some work with former U.S. Ambassador Swanee Hunt, who runs Hunt Alternatives in Cambridge and teaches at Harvard, that small school on the Charles River. But anyway, it's a small world, and it seems like we all come around to it in different ways. I came to this work from many, many years ago, having worked on Capitol Hill for Congressman Frank McCloskey, now deceased, and got involved on the intervention on Bosnia. And we saw thousands and hundreds of thousands of people killed and refugees going to many third state countries. They've scattered all over the world, much like Jewish diaspora, to 80 countries. And my talk is about the government of South Sudan and the challenges it faces, but I also want to frame this in the context of U.S. policy, because the United States government played a central role on brokering a comprehensive peace agreement for South Sudan through the administration of George Bush. And so one of my favorite lines is, George Bush did two good things during his 8 years. The first one was brokering the comprehensive peace agreement, and the second thing was funding PEPFAR, the president's program for combating AIDS, HIV/AIDS, which is truly a sterling legacy. But I would leave it there on George Bush. But I will say this: President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton and Susan Rice have picked up where the Bush administration stopped. Let me just go back for a second and talk about my orientation and why I ended up becoming the chair of Our Humanity in the Balance. And that is because so many of us that have worked in the field, that are humanitarian workers, that are human rights advocates, people that work in development, people that have worked in Capitol Hill where I worked, people who have worked on the policy side. I also worked in a multilateral organization called OSCE. Many of us have been on the ground. We've also been inside the State Department. We've all held different roles, and all of us that have joined our Humanity in the Balance have seen the futility of the international community to respond in a speedy way that could prevent death and destruction. So all of us have sort of thrown out the playbook. If you read Samantha Power's incredibly brilliant book in documenting U.S. policy vis-a-vis genocide, you will note that we have very few wonderful moments in our history in stopping genocide. So that said, I sort of throw out the book, and I want to tip my hat to John Prendergast for forming his Satellite Sentinel program, because we are going to put a volunteer team into South Kordofan State and the Nuba Mountains very shortly through our Humanity in the Balance, because we believe that the international community has not properly responded. So we're going in as civilian volunteers, and we're going to help and assist, and we're also going to document through photography and video. I just can't not talk about what's happened in South Sudan without talking about how radicalized I've become by witnessing genocide over and over and over. And once again, we are witnessing, even through John's efforts of documenting mass atrocities, we still do not have international governments reacting and taking care to prevent the ongoing deaths in the Nuba Mountains right now, where we fear people are beginning to starve. So, and there are hungry people ending up in South Sudan who have no food to eat because of the lack of safety in the camps. That said, let me just put that aside. I would just like to say that today in Juba, the newly sworn-in U.S. Ambassador Susan Page presented her credentials to President Kiir today. Also, Assistant Secretary of State for the African Bureau of African Affairs, Johnny Carson, delivered a seminal address about the U.S. efforts to counter the Lord's Resistance Army. And back in October, and I bring this up because the Lord's Resistance Army played a direct role in killing and creating mayhem in South Sudan for many, many years. On October 14th, the president put in 100 Special Forces soldiers into the LRA affected area to work with local governments and armies and with a specified mission to protect civilians. This is sort of a continuation of R2P2. Let me just also interject. I served in the U.S. Army for 15 years, so I'm not somebody who sort of comes by this pie-eyed. I mean, I understand the consequences for people's lives and what it means to bring to bear small arms, weapons, and drop bombs on civilians. So I think that all these things today, just today, are actually wonderful developments coming out of the State Department. But on the same day, McClatchy sends out a story, Dateline Addis Ababa, saying Western nations are really now on the sidelines of the Sudan talks, that in fact Princeton Lyman, our U.S. envoy to Sudan, a great African hand of many years, is really kind of being frozen out of talks, and that including not only the United States, but Britain, Norway, and the European Union, and now African leaders themselves, led by Thabo Mbeki, are overseeing these Sudan talks. Now, I don't know what that means in the long run. I just note that, just talking about the trajectory of U.S. leadership on helping South Sudan broker a peace agreement, and then helping shepherd the government through the referendum and then on to independence. So that said, I have to say that the U.S. government continues to be the largest donor. They have a huge mission there. I was there when Princeton Lyman arrived in Juba, straight from a meeting with Secretary Clinton, and she said, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And the U.S. aid mission there is only limited by housing. I mean, there just isn't enough housing in Juba. If people have been to Juba or lived in Juba or have been through Juba, you know that there's really very few places to live. It's a huge mission, and they've gotten a lot of financial support. The project that I actually worked on was called Government Capacity Building, Structure Capacity Building. We actually have been helping the government of South Sudan literally take books out of desks, which had handwritten budgets, and move everything over onto computers. And when I say when you walk into an office, there's no such thing as a networked computer. I mean, this is really rudimentary. There are very few landlines. Everybody's got a mobile phone. Many of them have more than one phone. And there is an increasing penetration of mobile phone technology into the States. But if I give you a thumbnail sketch, we're talking about a place where people don't grow enough. They have subsistence farming. All food must be imported in. Most of the water is imported in. Thereby, food is very, very expensive. The issue of health, there's, as you can imagine, only 17% of children are fully vaccinated. There's an ongoing effort now in disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. There are 90,000 people, including women and children soldiers, being demobilized, 13,000 to date. What I would say is that 72% of the population is below the age of 30. 83% of the population lives in rural areas. 27% of the adult population is literate, and actually for women it's much less. It's about 16% of women are literate, and an issue of great pride there is because it's so many generations of children not being able to go to school that one of the most prominent visualizations I saw when I was driving around was to see children in school, which is first in like 50 years that children are going to school every day, which is an incredible thing. But when you think about the lack of education, and so many diaspora ended up, living in here in the States, in Iowa and Tennessee and up in Minnesota. Many people have gotten advanced degrees from University of Iowa, for example, that when you get below the ministerial level in the government, maybe the secretary underneath the minister, very few people have more than a few primary years of education. And when I was working with the Minister of Human Development, her job was to, once people got hired, was to actually help them develop capacities on how to use computers, doing basic work, civil service work. And so you have this incredible drop-off of capacity. So you have a minister, maybe a deputy minister, a secretarial deputy minister, and then there's really very little capacity. And one of the other things that has vexed the government is that, and the minister told me this, so I'm not making this up, but the minister told me that, you know, a lot of people actually forge diplomas and certificates because they're desperate to work. And the main injection of cash into the economy is really through government work. That gives you the idea of just the challenges that face the country. But I would also say that as severe as the challenges are, and they are great, I would say that people really are engaged at the leadership level. I was very impressed with the vice president. My conversations with the president were limited, I have to admit that. But I would say that there are people there that really are committed. Many diaspora have come back to serve in the government. People who are educated have come back. And there's a lot of pride to see so many children in school. I would just add that 80% of the country in the rural areas, you know, do not have indoor bathroom facilities. You know, there's like about 55% have access to improved water. So, I mean, we're talking about really difficult challenges. And the United States itself is the leading donor in food aid. We spent almost $1 billion 2 years ago. I don't know what the latest figures are. The United States government's been operating on continuing resolutions, so there is no budget. I would say that in terms of humanitarian assistance, it's the bulk of our aid, but we're working very closely with the government on agricultural policy, long-term strategic policy, and really building up the infrastructure and capacity of the government. But given what's happening on the border and the United States flying in and out with Princeton Lyman, who was preceded by Scott Gratian, and I'll just be very honest, I was very unimpressed with General Gratian. He endorsed the president. He had a very poor reputation in the region. He was replaced by Princeton Lyman, and now a lot of people are expressing, I know a lot of humanitarian workers are expressing frustration because they're not getting food to different locations, but that isn't his job. People that work for him, and clearly there's also a World Food Program operating, that the challenges are truly great. I also think that Secretary of State's emphasis on women and girls is reflected. You do see now a gender ministry. That's good. I also worry about it being ghettoized, but I know that our funding streams are really pushing programs. And I worry about, again, the potential outbreak of war. So, given the circumstances. So I'm nearly done here. Again, I have to say that I am radicalized, that I'm really tired of genocide. I'm really tired of crimes against humanity. And I'm really tired of international organizations not responding. It's good to hear the Secretary General support the president on putting 100 Special Forces troops into the region, but I would say it's about 20 years late. And I hope that they can do some good. And I'm happy to hear the other comments from my colleagues.
Tanya, thank you so much for this graphic description of the birth of a nation and the troubles of moving from trauma and conflict into state building, and your side comments on the atrocities in Sudan itself and the need to not to be blind for that. Now, Huda has a long background defending women's issues and making them prominent. And I hope you can tell us a bit about the context of situation for women in such a volatile and difficult environment. both in the north and in the south. Now we're not talking about enmity, or is there still something that creates a sisterhood beyond borders?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be part of this conference and to be part of a wonderful panel. And actually, it's not only wonderful, but intimidating panel as well, and audience. I'm here today to talk as a human rights activist and a Sudanese citizen that always had a dream to live in a united one Sudan that's ruled by justice, where everyone has their rights and enjoying their dignity. But as a reality today that we have two Sudans, and as I really do respect, of course, the self-determination right, I accept the result of the independence, and I think that we should better work to make it two Sudans for better. I work for an organization named JISR. It's an Arabic word mean bridge, and that actually that's what we as NGOs or Sudanese civil society is trying to do, is to build a bridge from a bridge of peaceful coexistence between the North and the South. The concept of peaceful coexistence and social peace in the Sudanese political scene heavily appeared when it was very clear that the South Sudan is going into an independence. Actually, it appeared before the referendum, but it was very clear that what the result is going to be. Of course, many indicators and everything, but without specifying what is really the concept and the context of having peaceful coexistence or social peace. The most important aspect of the relation between peaceful coexistence and social peace, that whenever there is no peaceful coexistence in the state or the society, you can destroy the social peace between the states itself and between the neighbors, the states who are neighbors. As Mr. Luca mentioned before, that we still have issues between the two countries that have not been resolved yet, and they appeared in the referendum law as the nationality, currency, public service, the status of the joint integrated units, international conventions and treaties, assets and debts, oil fields, production, transportation and export, contracts and the environment to the oil fields, water, property, and any other matters agreed upon the parties. These issues are really sensitive as a daily and urgent lives people. It's not only between the two countries, but for any one of the countries, imagining what this can do if we didn't resolve it between the relation between the two countries. Although the referendum law only limited the pending issues in these 10 issues, but we really have a lot of urgent and sensitive and very important issues that's still pending, as a demarcation of the borders, the issue of a bay, of course, and the security arrangements that presume complete the demobilization and reintegration of military personnel from the Nuba Mountains and Southern Blue Nile and the Sudans in the Anli to the north, and the popular consultation. It's supposed to be, all these issues supposed to be resolved before the referendum, according to the CPA, but that's not happening. And the popular consultation is supposed to be in the Blue Nile and in the Blue Nile state and South Kordofan, and according to what's happening right now in the two cities, in the two states, I don't think they can be made soon. And last but not least, of course, the issue of Darfur, that's really continuing so far. And not only the popular consultation, but the war is still so far is going in South Kordofan and Blue Nile. What I want to say, that we don't have to forget that the war and the conflict and the army conflicts are still running right now in Sudan, in Darfur, in Blue Nile, and in South Kordofan. People are really suffering, and human rights are violating, and people are dying, as simple as that. To get into the point, I'm going to mention some recommendations regarding to the 4 points that the initiative of Mr. Mbeki have mentioned to the pending issues. And they agreed on dividing these pending issues into 4: the nationality, the security, the financial issues, and the international conventions. And you will see that I am so biased to the women's issue, so I'm talking from women's perspective in how we can have social, peaceful coexistence. Regarding to the citizenship, we think that all consideration should be made to ensure that citizenship criteria are linked to the human rights and the rights to choose. The negotiators' team should work to reach an agreement which avoid discrimination, statelessness, and that's not based on forced migration. And that's especially for the women from the south who still like, or they have been living all their lives in the north and they're still there. And this choice of the citizenship should not be based on the color, the race, the gender, or ethnicity, but the choice have to be only regarding to the right to choose. And this, whatever these people are going to choose, that should not affect the right of their property ownership. Women also think that a period of 5 years in term within the choice of citizenship is made to allow the adjustment and appropriate choice. We don't think that it's obviously, it can be in a very short time that you can adjust people from just changing all their lives from the north to the source, to the south, or vice versa. According to the Women's Peace and Security, one of the strongest recommendations that to create a national action plan for the implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, creating and or enforce laws against the illegal possession and use of arms, as these are often used to oppress women and abuse them sexually. Research and address the negative effects of economic disempowerment of young men and women and address the harmful cultural practices. Security of civilians and IDPs during repatriations and relocating should be a priority, and humanitarian package should care for the specific needs of women and girls, not only for women and girls, of course, but for the whole IDPs. We have a real issue of the IDPs now, right now, from the south and as well from South Kordofan and Blue Nile, of course. To involve the communities in the border areas in discussion of border demarcation, and this can be a very sensitive and insecure issues for all people, but especially for women, of course, because of the movements between, we have season movements, women are moving, and men and children, all of them are moving all the time. To ensure the security for all these people in the both sides are very important. In negotiating cross-border issues, the negotiators parties should give consideration to the seasonal traditional movement of people and animals. Security of women on either side of the boundary must be ensured. Regarding to the international convenience and legal issues, we think that we insist that the CEDAW should be signed by the Sudanese government on the, by the two governments. And I know that it would be signed by South Sudan government, but let's hope that the two governments are going to do so. Regarding to the economic and natural resources, the parties should ensure a significant amount of resources are appointed for health, education, empowerment, and development for women, empowerment of women. And development funds should go to the women's organizations, local women's organizations. And the last part of the recommendation, I can name it as the enable factor of peace, is the economic cooperation between the two countries. To achieve economic cooperation between the North and the South, we have to build a very strong trust ties between the parties. And we have to promote peace and to address the problems and border security and the other outstanding issues that we have been talking about. The first recommendation is to develop the policies, the plans, the motivations that encourage the economic integration between the two countries in the areas of agriculture, industries, and service. To facilitate and to encourage the usual movements of people and livestock through the borders between the two countries. To support the economical cooperation, social coexistence, and the exchange benefits. To cooperate and joint actions between the North and the South governments to exemption the accumulated debt on Sudan. Women are always there in the peace process, but they are nowhere when there is peace. And women also are always there in the voter education, but they are not there. They are nowhere when there is elections. I think that's right. So we are really insisting, and we know that they can do it, that women have to be part of all these committees that's going to negotiate in the post-referendum issues. The 10 post-referendum issues that are regarding to the referendum law, and also the other pending issues, the very sensitive and important issues. And I'm saying again that we need to do something urgent to stop the war right now in Sudan. The way forward of these recommendations, last thing that I'm going to talk about is the stakeholders. To achieve the mentioned goals above, we need cooperation between many actors, such as, of course, the two governments. We need them to keep the greater responsibilities they have with these issues and to have the citizens' rights as the first item in their agenda of negotiations, and to include active participation of different categories such as women and youth groups, civil society organizations, and other political parties. For example, there is a really urgent issue right now after the independence, that the youth who have been going to the Juba University, it was based in the north, in Sudan right now. For the majority of the southern of them, of course, they went back to the south, but they are not continuing in the university because buildings are not ready, teachers are not ready, and as well in the north. And then that can lead to a very big problems, that can lead them to frustration or to do I don't know what, and it's also not good for their future. So to have the citizens' need as the first item in the government's agenda, it's really important, and I think that's what it's all about. The second one is the international community, which has a long role in monitoring the CPA and the elections and then the referendum. They should contribute more actively in encouraging the two countries to resolve these outstanding issues peacefully and to continue supporting the local organizations. The last actor we have is the civil society organizations. Why civil society organizations should be involved in all this negotiation of post-referendum issues? Because the dialogue and acceptance of others and the non-violence value are part of the principles of civil society. Civil society plays an important role for achieving peaceful coexisting through the continuing of the relationship dialogue between the northern civil society and the southern civil society, through mechanisms and visions they agreed upon in advance. Because civil society is the voice of the voiceless, and because it has the representative, the organizational, and the knowledge power. And for being trustworthy on the community-based and non-politically biased, and for their scientific expertise and practical. For example, the civil society had a great role during the last elections we have, just in mobilizing and in voter education the people. I think all the organizations reach every single citizens in all rural areas, in the cities and everywhere. And people were really interested and they trusted this organization, despite what the result was out of this election. But the people have the right to know their civil and political rights, as well as all categories of rights. Before I end, I want to say that part of these recommendations are part of the outcomes of a conference named Mainstreaming Women Agenda in the Post-Referendum Agreements by South Sudan Women's Empowerment Network. This conference had grassroots women and governmental women and women from political parties and active women from all over Sudan, and they said what they need, and they had plans, and they are ready to contribute, and I think we all should support this movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Huda, for showing how a human rights-based approach, how gender awareness logically lead to recommendations that ultimately create a kind of a healing roadmap for both countries. And we have a microphone here. People who would like to ask questions to the panel can line up behind the microphone. We'll take 10 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll take a short break. And the remaining questioners will have to line up at the end of the second panel. So who would like to be first? Please identify yourself and tell us to whom the question is addressed, and make it a question and not a statement.
Okay, great. Hi, thank you very much for a wonderful panel. I'm a student here at SIPA, and my first question is to Mr. Dang. Do you think political Islam is actually fundamentally incompatible with an egalitarian and enlightened form of government? And the second question is to Ms. Domi. What do you think it would take? I heard that you're tired and sick and tired of genocide. So what do you think it will actually take to either peacefully or forcefully remove Bashir? Thank you.
Short and very forceful. Sitting on political Islam.
Yeah, I think let me come to the political Islam, but this is a very area that I am not confident with. But if you take Islam generally, I think there are different mood of which you can make a judgment. But even reading into Christianity and what happened, the mixing up between state and religion, I think Christianity came a long way, whereby the church was a dominant element in the running affairs of the state, and it was so difficult for the church to maintain it. This resulted not only the division within the churches, but even a clear separation between the state and religion. And this became a very bumpy process with Christianity. And I think, and it is natural, because if you see the sequence of this religion, Christianity came before Islam. And it is natural that Islam is getting into this process of how the dominance of Islam, of religion in the daily life of human being. And it seems, and that's the problem of the political Islam, that is very, very traditional in the way you want to implement the Islam as a religion into the individual and to the public affairs. It is natural. This evolution that is necessary in any religion. I remember even Dr. John was, our leader, was saying, you know, by the end of the day, if there's going to be a judgment, a day of judgment, it is the individual going to be to appear before the judgment. It is not a collective responsibility. It's about me and what I have done. It's not about I stay to be judged or people to be judged. And this is a reflection of what is really the relationship between religion to individuals. It's not about me assuming. And you know the problem with this whole thing about that person is more religious than the other, and there's somebody assuming so much about that I'm so religious than the others. This judgmental in terms of, you know, God is there somewhere, and you assume as if you are acting on behalf of the God. And what you see, the practice of Islam is so inconsistent with the actual teaching. So what I'm seeing is that the political Islam is this political Islam trying to retain power through this process. But let us see what is happening. If you see Iran, if you see Sudan, these are typical example of what is happening to the individual today. Because there's a very big outcry, whether women, youth, people, against what is happening to these people in this system that is assuming about Islam. Look to Darfur, it's a classical example. If there are people who actually supported Islam, these are people of Darfur. Actually, the Darfurians are the first people, actually the Africans are the first people to establish the first Islamic state in Sudan. But even the Darfuri people are the one actually so committed to Islam than any other people in Sudan. What happened to them? In the name of the religion, they have been marginalized, they have been victimized, and we have the worst atrocities committed in the name of Islam. And there's no justification for Islamic Islam, I mean the political Islam. In Khartoum today, they talk about Islam, while a clear case of Darfur is really not justifying for them to be. So what I'm saying, this is what is happening is Iran and Sudan are phasing out. The public is going to come up and they are going to have a very big uprising. Let us look to what is happening in Turkey. It's another mode of Islam. And in Islam, which is so very realistic. There's no way you can say that Turkey is not an Islamic country. It's an Islamic country with a realism of how to implement the Islam within the context of individual and within the state. I think those days of those countries with Islamic political Islam are just counted, and I think the people are going to talk out, and then they're going to air out their views, in a sense.
Thanks for the very nuanced answer. Tanya, on ending genocide.
Well, I I think a couple of things. One is that even though I was in the military, even though I was trained on everything from a .25 caliber to a Vulcan cannon, people like myself are willing now. We are looking at deploying as civilians into areas where people are at risk, because we believe that we must document what's going on. Now, some people are doing other things. I don't believe that petitions work anymore. If you look at the metric output on anything that has happened, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, I've been to rallies, I've signed petitions, I've done all of it. You know, I've even gone out in those countries and worked. It's not working. And organizing more and trying to put pressure on democratic governments that really don't have an interest in eliminating somebody like Bashir, or making sure that Bashir gets delivered to the ICC is definitely out of the reach of unarmed civilians. But I do think it's interesting that the president has now put 100 special forces on the ground in the LRA area. And I don't know what that means. I'm sure that some of it means that they're going to be advisors. Some of it means that if they come upon somebody from the LRA, I wouldn't be surprised if they're apprehended. So there has to be a concerted agreement. Now Kenya has been embarrassed by their lack of action when, in August of 2010, when they invited Bashir, because they said they had to, because he was in the neighborhood to their inauguration of their new constitution. They're now saying, we'll arrest him. We'll arrest him. And what has to happen is there's got to be an isolation. And clearly the isolation has not tightened down enough, because Mr. Bashir gets to continue to negotiate. And if there's a will, the international community can take Mr. Bashir out. And I don't think Mr. Bashir is going to stop killing until he's dead, or he's behind bars. That's it, pure and simple. And there has to be an agreement between international powers to do that, to agree to pick him up. But to allow him to negotiate at will and travel to third countries like Chad and Kenya, that's got to be stopped. And, you know, maybe John's going to shed some light on this, but I still don't see the kind of movement that we need to stop the killing. And I'm frustrated by the fact that petitions don't work. I don't believe they work anymore. You know, you can talk about 1,000 calls to a member of Congress. I know members of Congress that lost their jobs because of Bosnia, are working on Darfur, et cetera. So there's got to be a tightening down. Clearly, it was in the interest of the United States to go after Osama bin Laden and other members of al-Qaeda. I believe that al-Bashir is just as dangerous as they are, because they're killing a lot more people.
Thanks. We have time for one more question, and then we'll take a break and take other questions afterwards. Sir, you're on.
Abdelhaq Abu Nafisa, Sudanese American. I have a question actually for Dr. Deng. In April 1989, at Brooklyn Institute in Washington, D.C., Dr. Garang, he was ready to go and sign a peace agreement in Sudan. And he mentioned in the Peace Institute in Brookings, you can go back to the records, he said, we can go for election in Sudan. We're going to have 75 seats. The South, his movement, South of SPLM, they will have at least a minimum of 75 seats in the Sudan parliament. But we said to him that, Dr. Garang, you are not serious about a united Sudan. He said, don't say that to me. My first war started between the separatists and the unitists, and we win. The people who want to separate Sudan, he said, Dr. Garang said that we had a fought with them and we win against them. Who killed Dr. Garang? Bush never did good for Sudan, because Bush, he was serious about doing only deal and business with the people who are carrying arms, because the ex-prime minister of Sudan...
I'm sorry, but that's not a question anymore. We have 2 minutes for the answer.
okay.
So
Okay,
the question is, who killed the program?
My other question is for him, that do you have a serious plan to tell us that in a specific X years, a south of Sudan will be developed, for instance, like Singapore or something?
Mr. Deng.
Yeah, first concerning the issue of United Sudan, I think I don't want to spend a lot of time about it, because I think the people, they said it. They said their opinion. It would have been better for us to have a Sudan that all of us should be proud of. But definitely the people of Southern Sudan have never been proud of the Sudan. I think the northern elites, they need to take a lot of responsibility. The South has never been associated with this country, and I think it is the mistake of the northern elites, as I have been saying consistently. And the vote was a clear indication of how people felt about the United Sudan. But yet, we should work now of what we could have done in order to create a new environment that will allow the two states to coexist, and then to realize what we have not been able to achieve within a united Sudan. And I think that's the challenge for the intellectual, for the elites, as well as for the communities. And this is what we should, if we allow, for example, the National Congress Party recklessly managing their affairs in this way, it's actually harming the people of Sudan, but even harming the people of the South, but isolating Sudan in the international arena and in the regional arena. I think it is the voices of the people today that all over in Sudan to really raise their voice to side leadership. Because the more you keep silent, you are actually prolonging the suffering of the people. And I think it is our obligation, your obligation, to make sure that the real leaders, they should come up who can build the relationship in North and the South. Now, coming to the Southern Sudan, there will be a conference on the 14th about the engagement of the South and the agenda of the South. And I know it's a very difficult period. There is no doubt about the South having a lot of resources, but it's equally important, this is what I said, is facing a lot of challenges. And those challenges are the things that are going to put on the table. I'm doing now, for example, a research in UK about the issue of the resource curse argument. And what are the lessons that the South could learn in order to avoid the perils of the resource curse? There are good examples of countries that succeeded to manage their resources, to sow the resource rent into growth, but at the same time, the whole other issue of accountability and transparency. And I think we have a very good example. Botswana is a good example, which has really managed to make use of the diamond revenues to really to be one of the fastest growing economy in the world. So the curse is not actually so imminent. So it's a curse that you can avoid. And I think the South has a lot of chances. The intention of the international community, the resources that it's having, but equally important, a good political will that will help it to be on the track of the growth. I think the South has a very glaring, hopeful picture and future for the Sudan. But even it should set an example even to the rest of the Sudan. And that's why I'm so hopeful about the South, because I cannot talk about what I could do, what the South should do, because that one is going to be articulated in the conference going to take place on the 14th of this month.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the entire panel for a wonderful presentation. We'll take a 5-minute break, set up for the next one, and resume.